coming up on More Than Before.
We can allow the challenges, the failures, the difficulties to be that and just be that, and that's it, and let them pile up and bury us. Or we can let them pile up and climb up on top of them.
This is More Than Before with Nathan Cook.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another great episode. Today we get to dive into the story of someone who has truly had an impact on many lives in such a way that is transformational. He's a professional coach who has run 4 different businesses, including a nonprofit on top of that. Multiple books. He is an author. He is the founder of Blue Shirt Business Coaching. His clients call him Mr. Accountable, which, man, don't we all need someone to keep us accountable in doing the things that we ought to be doing? But what I really love about this guy is his desire to be a great husband, to be a great father, and to be a change catalyst for every single person that he meets in his day-to-day life. Kyle Gillette, welcome to the show, brother. How are you doing today?
I'm great, Nathan. Thanks for having me on your show. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm super excited to dive into your story. It's not very often that I get to talk to someone who has been an orange farmer in their life. You grew up on an orange farm, right?
I did. It's true.
So I find it interesting because people who have grown up in that kind of environment of hard work, hard labor, they have a very specific kind of worldview that kind of lends to them in being hard workers. I'm curious, when you were growing up, what were some of the memories that you have being on an orange farm? Were you the child that threw oranges at their older sister and they were running away? Like, I remember when I was a kid, there was a moment where I had friends over and my parents had tomatoes everywhere. And at one point, my parents went in the house and they came back out and we were having tomato wars, like full on tomatoes.
Nice.
Bro, tomatoes are a little bit more forgiving than oranges, but
It's true. It's true.
What were some of your earlier memories growing up on an orange farm, and maybe what were some of those lessons that you kind of carried forward as you were growing up?
Yeah, so a bunch of memories flooded me, but the one that came to mind that's pretty quirky and unique is my dad pushed out a bunch of oranges, they're probably navels. And so he pushed them out to put in some mandarins. And what that means is you rip out the trees using machines, and then you make these giant piles. The piles are like 40 feet tall of trees. And then you just have them sit there for weeks and weeks and weeks until they dry out so much that they can catch fire real easy. And they sit in the middle of these wide open fields in these 40-foot tall piles of trees. And my job during the summer, this is the middle of summer, it's like 100 and something degrees. My job was to take this can of diesel and gas, and on the end of it was a wick, basically like a sock or a towel. And I would kind of get a little bit of diesel and gasoline on it and get it lit. And I would go around throwing the fire onto these piles of
Your
trees.
father was teaching you about Molotov cocktails.
Yeah, I guess so. And it was 10 acres of this. So I don't know if people understand what 10 acres is, but it was 10 acres of this. And I'm walking around in the middle of these 40-foot tall fires, throwing more fire onto the trees to make sure everything all around it is catching fire. And I just remember walking through there. I was probably 15, something like that. And it created its own weather system, like the wind and the temperature. It was crazy, but it was pretty cool. I didn't get hurt, and the trees burned down. And then we put it, ground them up, and everything was fine. Put in new trees, and the trees are doing great. But it was the craziest thing to be running through there, throwing fire on these dead trees. So that's the first memory that popped.
Man, who would have thought like that would have led you to your arsonry years? No.
There's another story. I almost caught my house on fire. So, there's other stories with fire in my life. So it's true.
I love that so much. So I'm curious, what was your relationship with your parents back then? Did you grow up in kind of the stereotypical, in terms of like disciplinary stuff, like you do something bad, you go to the back of the barn and, you might be waddling for a little bit. Like what was that? Maybe you never got that because maybe you were the good child. Were you the good child growing up?
Well, I was the baby. So for me, my sister,
so you were
my
not the good
older.
child.
No, well, I was fine. I was afraid of my dad. I didn't need much of a warning from my mom. if my dad was coming home and I was doing something stupid with my sister or doing something too stupid to my sister or, whatever. And so she would say, oh, I'm going to tell dad. And then everything would just stop. And, I wasn't beaten or anything like that, fortunately. But I do remember we had this like 25-foot tall light that was over the barn, the second barn on the property. And it would light up the entrance to that barn and kind of a space around it. And so my buddies and I decided that it would be good to try to shoot the light out. So terrible shot, for whatever reason, I couldn't hit the dang light. So we shot it. I think it was like 20, I think it was 23 times. And the reason that I know that number is because my dad had to climb up the pole. You know how they have the little metal things that stick out, the little rungs? Yeah. He had to climb that up, strap himself into a harness, climb up it, and then replace the light because we had shattered the light after 23 freaking shots. And so then I was like, I don't know how it happened. We were trying to shoot a bird up there or whatever, lie I was making up. And that evening, he called me into his office at the house and he said, hey, we need to talk. And so he told me that it was not cool that happened. And then I just like flat out lied to him that it was totally an accident. And I still like that scene in my mind was a pivotal point, even though I lied my way through it. I know he knows, and I know he knew.
Well, now he definitely knows.
Right? but that was like huge for me. Cause that's like, I think the last time I told any sort of lie that matters to my parents, just there's things I haven't told them, but in terms of like, if I'm asked, and so it was huge, even though he didn't confront it in any sort of aggressive way about it, I just knew I was lying to him and that he was disappointed. And that was a big lesson for me. So,
yeah. Well, I'm curious, what were some of those core values that you remember early on that your parents were kind of trying to instill in you? I say try to instill because, right, it goes in one ear, out the other. Yeah. And then, 10 years down the line, I find myself even today, sometimes I'm like, oh man, my mother's coming back and she's haunting me with those things that she told me so many years ago. This is why you should do these things this way.
Right.
What were kind of some of those common themes that you remember growing up that maybe you kind of pull back into your current life?
Yeah, I think both my parents are social in their own way. My dad's more of an introvert. My mom's more of an extrovert, but my dad will talk with anybody. If he wants to generate a conversation, he can just generate a conversation with anybody. My mom is a great storyteller. And so I've tried to grab both of those things into my life, is just converse with anybody that I can, but then try to do a good job of telling stories. My dad is an avid reader. So it took till after high school for me to kind of embrace the desire to actually read something. But once I did, that's been instilled in me. And then I think the core of it all was the idea that like blue has some representation for me with the idea of like blue collar lifestyle, blue collar mentality. And white collar people have this mentality too, but like it for me associates to the idea that when I shake your hand, Nathan, that when I say I'm going to do something, I'll do it. And I don't need a phone call reminder or a text reminder or for you to make me sign something. No, I'll do all those things. That's fine. But like, I don't need it because my word is my bond. My yes is yes and my no is no. Now, I'm not perfect. And so I'm sure I've screwed that up. But that's the mentality that got embedded in me. Yeah. And then getting up early as well is another one, a very practical one. My dad would get up, 5 a.m. or earlier almost every day because he needed to work. And so that got instilled in me in the way that I approach my life and my work as well. And that's been, those components right there are pretty big and pretty powerful for me.
Yeah, definitely. So we kind of fast forward into kind of your high school years. You were a competitive swimmer, not swimming like, lap swimming, but you were actually a water polo enthusiast. In fact, you and your team were actually pretty good. You actually made it to the 1999 Junior Olympics, right?
We did. Yeah. We didn't do super well though. I think we won one game, but it was a good experience, and it was cool to see the level of competition that exists out there in water polo and swimming as well. So I just remember competing against these guys that are, they're in high school as well, but they're like 6'3" and like 210 pounds. And I'm at that time, I'm not much taller now, but anyway, at that time I was probably 5'8", soaking wet, 160 pounds or 100, maybe 70 pounds. But I held my own against those big guys. So it was cool to have that experience and know that I could hold my own. But man, there's levels to everything was the big lesson from that. Because, you think you're good at whatever you're good at, and you are, but then you get exposed to these people that are next level. And these are just guys in high school. Because then you've got the club level, college level, and of course you get into the professional and then Olympic level. And it's really neat to realize kind of where you are in the pecking order and how much more opportunity there is, regardless of what, industry, if you will.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a big thing is, self-awareness is important. But what's so funny is when it comes to this concept of self-awareness, both of us being coaches and working with people think, oh, I'm going to gain a lot of self-awareness and I'm going to go and enter into myself and think about things. And that's where I'm going to become self-aware, which is such an oxymoron because self-awareness comes from other people.
Yeah.
It becomes awareness of where you are in the pecking order of other things. I'm curious. So you're finishing off your high school career. And at this point, you've kind of made a decision in your life of what kind of occupation you want to go and pursue. Tell us a little bit about that decision to go into studying kinesiology and exercise science, which I love because that was something that was my path.
Nice.
I was going to go that way. And I think not same exact experience, but there was an experience where I was like, I think maybe life needs to change. But I'm curious for you, during those earlier college years, what did you kind of discover about yourself?
Yeah. So I jumped into it. I had a teacher in high school named Mrs. Sharafa, and she was a anatomy teacher. And I found anatomy to be absolutely fascinating, just studying it and studying anatomy and physiology. And I got it. It just made sense to me. And so that opened my eyes to physical therapy, and I went for it in that direction. In college, for me, my major classes were a joy. I loved them. I basically got A's in them. The other classes were fine, whatever. They were just kind of, to me, a waste of time because I wasn't interested. I didn't really care. So I just did them because you had to. But for me, college was this experience of learning about my fears, my limitations, who my friends are, who they aren't. And ultimately, my freshman year was a big turning point for me because it was probably, let's say 3 or 4 weeks into the quarter. And my roommate was pledging for, I don't remember the name of the fraternity, but he was pledging. And I knew that I could also go somewhere and pledge too. But there was people knocking on doors for that purpose to ask guys to pledge and to do all that kind of stuff. And then there was also this Campus Crusade for Christ, or Crew, it's called now, knocking on people's doors as well. And I remember making a decision between, am I going to do booze or am I going to do Bible? And you can do booze and Bible. I get it. You can. And I have a little bit of alcohol from time to time, and I'm not a teetotaler or whatever, but yeah. I just remember making that choice that I knew if I chose booze, then I would be addicted and it would be a problem for me. It's not a problem for everyone, but that was a huge turning point for me because it shaped who my friends became and who I became. Other people, they're going to go into fraternities and they're going to turn out fantastic and they're not going to go down a negative path or anything. I'm not implying that, but I would have. I know it for a fact. And so fortunately, I made a good choice, and that completely shaped what happened for me. I mean, I went on to various countries because of that, and I had a ton of really cool experiences with people because of that. And then my first job out of college was in a men's mentoring program, which led me to what I do now. So that choice 3-something weeks into my freshman year was pivotal.
Yeah. Well, and I love kind of this part of your story. And I don't know if you'd say this is the pivotal point of your story, but you're going to California Polytech State University to get your degree, and then you're on track. Like you are right there. You're just almost ready to finish the race here with school and actually go to start, doing internships and working. But you went on a missions trip to India, and different environment, different culture. And all of a sudden, you came back and life was kind of flipped in a different direction. I'm curious, I would love to hear a little bit more about your experience on that trip specifically, of how that affected you, maybe how that changed some of the ways that you thought now that you can look back on that.
Yeah.
So what were some of those experiences that you had? And then when you came back, what caused you to completely recalculate your vision on where you wanted to go? Like, I know you didn't have like an exact vision of what you wanted, but you knew that the one you were going after wasn't the one that you should be.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I think on that trip, it's funny. I was thinking about one of the guys on the trip this morning, not even kidding. I don't remember his name off the top of my head, but I can see his face and I can see the clothes that he was wearing. And I just remember him distinctly. Good guy. He couldn't speak English, and obviously I couldn't speak Banjara, and so we couldn't really communicate very well. But there's unspoken communication that happened, and I think a lot of what happened on that trip was a very spiritually moving experience for me. I had some kind of really scary spiritual experiences that happened, and some really powerful spiritual experiences that happened, and I remember sharing the gospel with one family in one village. And then on the other side of this dirt road was another village. And you had to get permission from the chief of the villages to be in there. So we're working with what you could probably label the untouchables in India, where they live in huts and they live in villages and they're not in homes. And so we go out to these villages and I'm sharing the gospel with one family, and then the next day we come back and we go to the other village and we're talking with those folks. And I just remember the guy in the first village ignoring me. He's just sitting on the edge, like, who's this guy? Like, what does he have to say? And his kids and wife are paying attention to us. And then we leave and go to wherever we stayed. I can't remember where we stayed. And then came back to the next village, which is literally like a stone's throw away. And these two villages, you could see each other's houses, which are, again, they're huts, the size of like a modern day bathroom. It's not a big home or anything. And I start to share the story with the other village. And all of a sudden, this guy comes running across from one village to the other. And I'm like, what is going on? And he starts talking to one of the translators, because we had to have two translators to make this thing work. So he starts talking with one of the translators and shares whatever he shares. And then that translator translates it. And then that translator shares with me what happened. Long story short, this guy heard what we had said and decided that this was something he really wanted. And he wanted it so bad that he ran across to the other village and needed to tell this guy to also believe. Now, I'm not trying to evangelize on this call. All I'm saying is that was huge for me to know that what I have to say can be translated. What I have to say doesn't have to be perfect. And what I have to say impacts. And it impacts in such a way that some people will shift their entire lives. And all of us have that type of impact we can have. And when God's in it, I think it's even obviously more powerful, at least from my perspective. And so that intentionality, that commitment in retrospect and in that season of my life was kind of a big deal. Like, wow, this guy heard this and he just knew it was the right thing to go after. So he's going to commit. Fast forward to an interview I had at the men's mentoring program where I'm asked to commit to living in this house for a year, giving up all the things that I have and really not being able to see my friends very much at all. Right. And I committed. And so I think there was this inspiration from that experience to know that if someone like himself could do that and see the value and just intuitively know and trust, then I could do the same. And that decision that I made turned into 10 years of work or 9 years in that program.
Wow. It's amazing. And I think a lot of people can relate to this. Early on in life, we're told to run. Go fast, run after everything, going after your goals and your dreams. If this is what I want, so I'm going to go to school, and you kind of have it all planned out and you just kind of run for it. And I think very few times do we actually stop long enough to reflect and to sit in those moments. And if I'm not mistaken, there was a moment when you first came back and you were actually in an interview to be working at this place. And I remember you kind of talking about this raggedy red chair. And you said something that was kind of profound to me when I heard you say it, but that you felt like you were being held there in that moment to be there. You wanted to run off to the next thing, figure out what you were doing. And you kind of felt that hand to say, no, stop, wait, this is where you should be. And as coaches now, we can look at that and go, yeah, that completely makes sense. In order to speed up, you have to slow down. Back then, though, probably didn't really recognize that. But how powerful has the idea of pausing and slowing down, how has that impacted your life?
What do you say to that? Right? Like the impact is it's priceless, I guess would be a good answer to that question, because I do that every morning. I do it through prayer. I do it through journaling. I do it through NLP techniques in my own life now. That's a new thing that I've learned recently. And there's something about going inside, if you will, going inside yourself and listening to your unconscious mind, listening to what God has to say to you, if that's something that you believe, listening to the messages that you've had from other people that you haven't taken the time to reflect on. For me, I went through a little bit of a rough season just as COVID hit, right? So COVID hit and I lost 75% of my business. And I did a lot of reflecting at that time. And I went, man, this sucks. This is hopeless. This is miserable. I'm not going to make it. Like I might as well quit and get a job. And I had all that language in my head. And then I did the reflection work. Like, wait a second. I need to think about what this means. I need to think about where I am and what kind of control I have. And so I made a decision in that moment. I went, I'm going to choose a different path here. And so I think it took 3 months for me to like wallow in self-pity and then go, this is stupid. I need to change my own mind here. And that was done through reflection and self-awareness and prayer and all those things. And then I flipped the business around and grew at 41% that year, right? So crashed 75% and then got it all the way back up and then grew at another 41% from the previous year. Wow, I'm special. Good. Look at me. No, it's more that I just made a choice. And I continue to make that choice to have the right perspective and focus. But I needed to spend the time reflecting on what my attitudes were, what my focus was. Otherwise, I was never going to get to that point. So that was a big one for me because I probably wouldn't be in business if I hadn't made that choice.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's interesting too, because I think ADHD is kind of thrown out there quite a bit for a number of different people. We label everyone as ADHD of like, oh, you can't focus. You can't do that. You know what? Everyone at this stage of life, what is the average attention span? Isn't like 3 seconds, which is like less than a goldfish. Like we can focus less than a goldfish nowadays. Congratulations, human race. But there's something like, I'm someone that likes to go really quick. I run hot and I'm going to this, I'm going to that. And I don't like to slow down, but slowing down is really beneficial, especially when we live in a culture where we could almost say that everyone around us has this hyperactive disposition. Like as a go-getter, I know like for myself, it's really easy to get distracted by inanimate objects. Oh, shiny bass boat, like whatever that is. I know a lot of entrepreneurs that are like that too. For yourself, how do you stay focused in a world that seems so distracting?
Yeah, relationships. I have to remind myself of, okay, what is most important and make sure to keep the people, because most of our distraction is things. If we're distracted by people, that's not really a problem. Yeah. But if we're distracted by things, that's typically going to be a much bigger problem. Yes, people can be a distraction. That's a problem. But primarily, if you're distracted by like your spouse or your children or a client or a friend or someone in need, it's not really a problem. That's a good thing. And let yourself go on that mission to serve that person, whether you know them well or not. But when we're constantly distracted by things, that's a problem. So for me to combat that, I literally use a to-do list, and on that to-do list, I include relational things. I have on my to-do list for the projects, it's physical, emotional, spiritual, relational, vocational, and there's one more I can't remember off the top of my head. And those are my projects, and within those projects are my tasks, and that keeps me focused on the core things that are most important to me, instead of being blown and tossed by the wind, right? So. Yeah. I'm okay to be distracted by people is what I'm basically come to peace with. If I can be okay with distraction with people, then the things are going to go into place where they need to.
I love that. And by the way, if you guys want to learn more about what he was just talking about, he actually wrote a book on that, right? About making the lists and going through each one of those checkpoints in your life to dive more into that, which is a great book. So, Kyle, what's the name of that book?
It's called Life Map: Building a Future When You're Lost in the Present.
Yeah, and you can easily find it. You can find it on Amazon.
Yep.
It's got a picture of a map on it, kind of simple to find.
Yeah,
which is great. I like simplicity because I'm a simplistic guy. I like to say that I am. I'm probably more complicated in my head, which probably is simplistic to most people. So I'm curious, though. You've also done some recent work in learning to listen. When I first became a coach, it was literally the worst characteristic to develop, because I like to talk. I like to say things. I like to tell stories. And when I go into a conversation, it's all about me. It's all about me. It's not about you. But when I became a coach and I started understanding the premise of asking good questions and being quiet, staying in the silence and allowing that person to process and to think, my relationships transformed. My life started to transform, not even just with the relationships, but like with the things that I was doing in my day-to-day life. I started to find myself asking questions and then just slowing down and stopping. How has that become an even greater process in your life today than when you first started learning about this process of listening and asking questions?
Yeah, listening is really interesting. I love to help people get to a place where they realize how to listen better themselves. And the only way that I've been able to do that is by going on that journey myself. And there are definitely skills to listening well, but it's also an art. Like, there is a science to it and there's an art to it. And it's learning how to meld those two together really powerfully. For me, I have the thing that I call the wiser way to listen, and that's in my other book that I teach people how to do that approach. But more and more so, I'm learning that listening really is an art, and you're not listening for content. You're listening for meaning. You're listening for intuition. You're listening for whatever God is guiding you to hear, and not trying to use some sort of technique. I think once the techniques get dialed, once you learn how to pay attention to body language and pay attention to your own body language and the eye contact stuff and the way you gesture, once you get that a little bit figured out, so it's a little bit more automatic, now you can really tune in to what's actually being said, how they're saying it, and why it's important. When my first training was through a program called Creative Results Management, and he had a model called the coach model. And in the middle of the training, one of the things they said was listen for meaning. And that, I got it then, but I get it way better now. Yeah. I get that that's what you're really listening for, is meaning. What's underneath all that? So when I'm sitting at the dinner table with my kids, let's listen for meaning. Why is my middle kiddo telling me this? What is the reason that they're telling me this? Not what's the content of it, because that's important, but nowhere near as why is this so important that she shares this off the wall topic out of nowhere with us. And the same thing, obviously, with a client or with a friend, your spouse. So that's been the deepest revelation for me as it relates to listening.
I know community has been a huge piece for you too. Mentors, surrounding yourself with the right people, people who grow you, expand the way that you think. As you look back, who were some of those mentors that stick out to you of saying, man, this person, because I think there's something special about a powerful mentor. A powerful mentor can see you where you are, and they can see where you can go, and they can almost see some of the steps to get you to that place. Yep. But I find that sometimes we find mentors in our life that only see us where we are, and they speak to where we are, and that's it. And then we have other people other mentors in our life that say, oh, I see where you can be. Here's all these things that you should do today. And they don't take into account that this is where you are in your life. Like currently right now, we have a lot of young kids in our world. I've got 3 kids under 5 years old currently. And my goodness, when people tell me that sleep is an important thing, I understand that sleep is an important thing.
Right.
That doesn't mean I'm getting it.
Right.
Because the stage of life that I'm in does not necessarily coincide with what I would like. So I'm curious for you, who are those early, not even early mentors, but who were some of the most impactful mentors that were able to see you where you were? And what did they speak into you so that you could move forward to who you were created to be?
Yeah. So my dad is first because, the first man in my life that really got to speak into my life. And I've already shared a little bit about him in terms of like integrity and your word is your bond and hard work, that kind of stuff. So from him, it was a lot of that, but also he was always available to me. Right. When it mattered, he was available to me. There was times when he didn't want to shoot hoops with me and it was frustrating, but otherwise he showed up to events and he showed up when I needed him. Right. So that was that was one of many lessons from my dad was show up, be available to those that you love, those that need you, that want you. Right. And so that happened there. Then go into that program, that mentorship program. And Jack is the name of the gentleman that runs it. And he taught me about, I guess the story that comes to mind is that in that program, we ran a pet resort to support it. And so I was the pet resort manager, I think for 4 years. I get timeline screwed up, but for 4 years. And I remember walking around the property with him and we were talking about some plans for the pet resort, adding some more cottages and doing certain things. And we walked by this piece of trash. And so we walked by it. And then he stopped us like 2-3 feet after the piece of trash as we're getting ready to walk into this fenced area where all the dogs are. And he said, I don't remember the words exactly, but basically he's like, how come you didn't pick that up? Stop and pick it up. And underneath that was this much bigger lesson that he explained that like when you can do it, go ahead and do it. When I leave a room and I could make the bed for my wife instead of having her make it, often I stop at the threshold of the door, turn around, I go, I should probably just make this bed. And then Jack's story comes to mind. I'm like, yeah, just stop, make the bed, or stop, pick up the trash, or stop, do the dish, or stop and just stop and listen, whatever it is. But it's like my other book is called Right Now Leadership. And it's the idea that you have this moment right now to lead. And he gave me that lesson that piece of trash was a moment for me to lead right now. I could pick up that piece of trash and lead. And so that's kind of a summation of a ton of what Jack taught me. I mean, I spent every Tuesday with him at lunch for almost 9 years, so there's a lot of lessons in there, but that's the biggest one is do it now, whether it's just a myriad of things. And then Larry is the mentor I have right now. I've always had mentors. I've been very fortunate, but I've also sought them out intentionally. Didn't just happen. I asked for them. And so that's been,
they didn't just float into your life and be like, Kyle, here I am. You've been waiting for me.
Because there's other ones too I've had, and there's a little short stint mentors as well. And then there's accountability partners I've had too, which is a whole nother topic that I go into in the book. But with Larry, he's been in my life in a season of like doubt and struggle and frustration. And so he reminds me of who I am and like the character of who I am and the quality of who I am and the impact that I've made. And I've had plenty of tears in conversations with him because he's spoken that truth. He's reminded me of who I am. And I think we all need somebody like that in our lives that tells us who you are, like remind you, this is what I've seen in you. This is what you're not seeing in yourself, but I see in you all the time. And his favorite thing is, have you ever seen the YouTube by Paul Newman? So stop it.
Just stop it.
Just stop it. Don't be afraid anymore. Stop it.
Do you want to be buried in a box? Do you want to be alone for the rest of your life? Well, just stop it.
Just stop it.
I love that.
Yeah.
By the way, if you guys are listening right now, go and check out this video. I believe it was Mad TV.
Yeah.
Stop it. And absolutely fabulous. If you ever want to know what coaching is all about, that's pretty much what it is.
It's true. And sometimes we wish you could just say it that succinct. Sometimes you can't. But anyway, so he would literally sometimes tell me that. Stop it. So those are the three of many, fortunately, many that have spoken into my life in a way that's helped me be the man that I am.
Well, I love that too. The story that you tell about, walking around as the pet manager, not the pet manager, the pet resort manager. He was the pet manager. He walked around and managed all the pets.
I manage petting very well. I'm very good at petting. I teach people
very good
how
at
to pet.
petting. That's why I decided to have children. I could pet them. Great job, daughters. But it's such an impactful piece because I think walking around, visualizing, seeing that piece of trash. How many of us have walked in our daily life and seen something that we could do and we just don't do it? And I think a lot of times we think, oh, well, that's not my job. That's someone else is going to do that. And how much better would life be if we were able to just step up and pick up a little bit more weight in our life, right? Like, I'm curious for you, has there been a time that maybe comes to mind of like, you felt like you should go and talk to someone and you're like, oh, I don't want to, I'm in a rush. I have things to do. I'm really busy. And then you just say, you know what, forget it. I'm going to go and do it. And you do it. And all of a sudden there's this like amazing transformational story that happens. Have you experienced that before?
Many times. The one that instantly comes to mind is I was sitting on a coffee shop waiting for a meeting to start. And I was sitting in the parking lot of a coffee shop waiting for a meeting to start because I had this little gap and I didn't want to be in the coffee shop on the phone, whatever. So I'm sitting there and I noticed this guy pull up in a dump truck, like a big 18-wheel sized tractor trailer dump truck. And he gets out and he's inspecting the vehicle. And I'm going, I need to talk to him, don't I? Oh, crap. I'm supposed to talk to him. Oh, no, I have to talk to him. Oh, no, I'm not going to do it. Well, if he does a certain thing, then I'll go and talk to him. And if he doesn't
justify it, right?
Yeah. If he doesn't do that certain thing, then I'm not going to talk to him. Okay. So he does a certain thing. I'm like, oh, crap, I got to talk to him. Long story short, I don't talk to him. And I'm like, man, I felt really bad about it in my heart, in my head. I'm like, I was supposed to talk to that guy and I avoided it for whatever insecurities at the time that I was dealing with. So then I'm sitting there still waiting for the next meeting to start in my car. And there's this older car. No, it was a Camaro. It was a newer Camaro. Is like 4 sections in the parking lot behind me. The parking lot's pretty much empty. And the guy gets out and he starts smoking. And I'm like, oh crap, I'm supposed to talk to that guy. So I'm sitting there and I'm going, I got to talk to that guy. So I hear myself say it a couple times and I'm like, just get out of the dang car, get out of the car. So I get out of the car and I'm awkwardly strolling up 4 car parking like rows to him, no other cars. It's me and this dude. And I'm like striding over to him, just awkwardly walking to him. And I go, hey man, I thought I should talk to you. I just wanted to say hello. And so we start talking and he tells me this story about meeting this woman that he met and getting engaged and he's going to get married. And he's like so excited to get married and his life is changing and he's stoked about it and all this stuff. And then I said, that's awesome. And I said, can I pray for you? And I pray for him and he goes on his way and I go on my way. And it was just, it was scary to do that, to walk up, It was a long way to walk too. It's one of those scenes.
Was this in California? Because you're not supposed to walk up to people from long distances in parking lots in California, right? Isn't that dangerous?
Anywhere. It was Washington, anywhere. Anyway, so he, I don't know what happened with him and it's okay, whatever. But it was just one of those moments. And of course I've had other moments where you have that conversation that shifts people's lives and shifts your life as well. So, yeah.
Well, I think I love that you say just do it. Like it's so often that we get in this like mental gymnastics of whether we should do something or whether we shouldn't, whether we should say hi to someone or, pay for the person's drink or fill in the blank of whatever it is. So often we get so wrapped up with these mental gymnastics of whether or not it's right or wrong or whether we should do it. When if the thought comes to mind, I find that most times if I just do it, it blesses someone.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily always bless me,
yeah,
but it does bless that person because it kind of goes back to what you were saying earlier of we have to learn to listen, not to respond, but for context, to understand who that person is and what they're going through, because all of us are walking around and we just want someone to hear us.
Yep.
There's a power to being heard. You are a lifelong learner. You're one of those I need to be learning something. You know, you start itching. You're like, I need a program. Like, what should I buy next?
True.
And one of the things I love about this is so many people get to a point in their career where they go, yeah, I don't really need to learn anything. I think I've kind of got it. I got it down. I kind of want to jump back into your days of, water polo, because I think, and not necessarily jump into those days, but I think a lot of times when we are athletes, I think we learn some pretty valuable lessons when it comes to sports. You're a competitive guy. I'm extremely competitive. I don't like losing anything, which is why I can't play board games with my kids. Like we play cards, like the memory card game with our kids. And my wife is like, just let them have a win. And I'm like, no, they will earn it.
You can break yourself of that, because I had to break myself. I don't let anybody win still. But your daughter recently just beat you, right, in a game. Oh, I'm sure. Yeah, I'm sure they have. We play these. Yes, I'm sure we've. Yeah, there's a lot of humility that happens when you lose to a 7-year-old or a 12-year-old or whatever. That's for sure.
And they're not gracious winners by any means.
Oh no, that's the worst, right? Where they're like, "Ha, I got you," and you're like, "No, dude, don't do that. Like this doesn't work."
I thought I taught you better than this. But it kind of reminds me of a lesson that I learned early on of this idea of like being highly competitive and wanting to win. Our best lessons are not learned when we win. They're when we lose, right? When we have the abysmal failures, like, so martial arts was kind of my thing, and not kind of my thing. It was my thing. That was my life. Lived, breathed, ate it, everything. And I remember going to competitions, and you work so hard because like you have forms, these patterns, like you have to do it exactly the same way every single time. Not hard, right? It's like a math equation. Learn it and just spit it out. And I remember there was like a 3-year period of time where I'd go to these competitions and I'd stand up and I'd say one name of a form and then I'd do a completely different form. Or like halfway through, I'd forget where I was and I'd start doing something completely different. And I wouldn't do well, but I learned a lot about myself. Mm-hmm. There's a power to losing that I think that we forget about. And because you are a lifelong learner, I think that the losses actually mean more to you than the wins, right?
Yeah, there's a saying. Well, there's two things that come to mind. We can allow the challenges, the failures, the difficulties to be that, and just be that, and that's it, and let them pile up and bury us. Or we can let them pile up and climb up on top of them and have that success from them, right? You learn from them. You can climb up on those failures and struggles and whatnot. And then the opposite of that is, in a way, I heard someone talk about how when you're struggling, that the guy said there's no growth on the mountaintop. And I was like, that's really interesting, because it's not 100% true, but like when you're talking about the peak of like a 14,000 foot mountain, there is nothing growing up there. And that's where we want to be. We want to be at that peak. I got to climb Shasta 2 summers ago, Mount Shasta, which is a 14,000 foot mountain. You get up to the top and it's snow and rocks and nothing else. It's beautiful, but there's no growth there. But in the valley, there's a ton of growth. There's meadows, there's trees, there's animals, there's life there. But the valley is usually metaphorically connected to struggles. And so if you're not in the valley of challenges, it's unlikely that you're going to find those beautiful flowers and that green grass that you can get nurture. You can be nurtured by, right? And so that was huge for me, especially because last year was a valley for me. And so going, you know what? There's a lot of learning that I can experience from that valley of 12 months. So I encourage people to embrace it, right? Don't try to push it away. It's like when we push away the emotions and we push away the limiting beliefs and stuff, they just become stronger and stronger and more damaging to us. Embrace the feedback, and then all of a sudden the growth is the result, and you'll get to that peak at some point.
Yeah. It kind of reminds me of, it doesn't necessarily irritate me, but every once in a while you get the person that walks up and you're like, if you could go back in time and change any experience that you've had to be better, like what would you choose? And so I'm gonna ask this question of you, but with a slight twist, because I hate that question. But I'm curious, what was one of the hardest times that you went through, and you grew so much through that you would willingly go back through it again, not because you want to suffer the way that you suffered or that you had to go through it, but because of the growth, because of what you came out of it with. What were one of those times that was really difficult that you learned so much that, man, even it would be hard, I would go back and live through this again just because I know how much it shaped and molded who I am?
Several items or ideas, come to mind. And I remember, so we moved here in 2014, here being 2 hours north of Seattle. And we moved.
You're practically in Canada, dude. Like, we might as well just call you Canadian.
Yeah, we are. we are 5 minutes from British Columbia, so we're very, very close. I always say I can throw a football twice and hit Canada, but that's not true. Can't throw it that far. But anyway, I remember. So we moved here, and then we lived. Yeah, that's the story to tell. It's coming to me. But anyway, we lived at my in-laws, and just for a season, so we could buy a house and, have our own space and all that. And my wife is a nurse, or was a nurse. And so it was easy for her to find a job. You just apply at a hospital, you get a job. Like, nurses, it's awesome.
Yeah.
So she got a job quick. And I remember living with my father and mother-in-law while my wife is working. And I applied to 50 jobs and didn't get a single interview. And I'm like, what the heck is wrong with people? What is wrong with me? What is going on here? I managed a nonprofit. I managed a pet resort. I had 20 employees at one time that I was leading. I doubled the income of that pet resort. Like, I know what I'm doing when it comes to leading people. Why can't I get a job? And it was this horrible season for me, just this horrible season of like, I'm a loser. I can't get a job. My value was like so attached to my work. And it was really devastating for me. Mm. And then on top of that, I wasn't just like living in my own house with my wife and kids. I was living in my father-in-law's house on top of all of that. You talk about this embarrassment. He didn't care. He was cool with it. It didn't matter to him. He's a wonderful man. Finally, I ended up getting a job as an HR director. And actually, no, I got a job at a senior living place, which was a terrible job. But anyway, I got a job there. But the season of that for me was too much of my identity was wrapped up in what I do versus who I am. And I still struggle with that, right? I don't got it figured out. But that was the lesson, and persevering through all those applications and not giving up and not quitting for 4 months of constant applications and constantly trying to get interviews and getting rejected. But what was cool is I ended up using that for 2.5 years, that experience, as I helped another organization multiple years later hire a bunch of people. And since that experience, I've hired 200 people in my life now as a result of going through the process myself and learning it and shaping it. So it worked out, right? Along with, I actually got a job, and now I know what it's like, blah, blah, blah. So that was huge. Would I do it again? I don't want to do it again. I wouldn't take it away, though. I wouldn't take it away. Yeah.
I find it interesting. It's really interesting for me. For me, I always want to be the provider for my family. I want my wife to be able to lounge on the beach and, sip Mai Tais or whatever. Right. I think us as guys, we always want to do that. We want to be the provider for our families so that they can kind of do whatever it is that they would like to do. We want to be able to add that kind of security and value to our families. But there are those moments in life, especially as an entrepreneur. I think entrepreneurs feel this way more than anyone else. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs quit way too early. Like, I remember early on in my career where I was talking with a gentleman, and he said, yeah, if you're not doubling your income, or you're not making 80 grand within the first 8 months, then you suck and you should go do something else. And I kind of look back at that and I kind of laugh, and I'm like, if I were to do that, I would have missed out on so many different opportunities, so many, and not just money opportunities, like opportunities to speak into people's lives. There truly is something to kind of hanging in there. What would you say to the guy that is working, multiple jobs? Maybe he's trying to do his side hustle, not my favorite word in the world, side hustle, but they're trying to get something else off the ground, but they're also working. But then they also feel this tearing inside of them of like, I got to be there for my wife. I want to be there with my kids. I feel torn in a million different directions. What do you say to that guy? Because I find that guy a lot.
Mm. Yeah, I would say find other people to tell your story to, because one of the things that I'm building a community right now for people like that and people that don't have the same situation, but a community of men in particular that are feeling alone, feeling isolated, feeling like they don't have any support because they didn't create it. And so in that case, I would say, who's the guy or woman, but preferably a guy, who's the guy that you can talk to, that you can just share this with? Because I think you're going to find some commonality. And when you find that commonality, all of a sudden you're not on that island dragging around the driftwood creating an SOS. You're not doing that anymore. You're not near as, I say, stressed out, overwhelmed, and stuck. When you realize there's other people that are also feeling that way, the feeling of the stress, the overwhelm, and the stuckness dramatically changes, because you go, oh, it's okay. Other people are experiencing that. So I would urge this person to go, who can you talk to? Who can you share your story with? And then secondly, offer to hear them out too. Offer to hear what their pain is, what their problem is, with not the intention to fix it, but just to be present with them. So reciprocate. Do those two things and your perspective will change significantly.
I love that first one. It's funny because I've been looking at islands for some reason. Yeah, because I want to purchase an island. But it's funny because this idea of like, I'm on an island by myself. Guys are really good at this. Yes. We're really good at putting ourselves on an island, going, we're all alone. And we just kind of stay in this one little area. We never go out. We never explore to meet other guys to see where they're at. And when in actuality, it's like we're on this island and we say that we're by ourselves, but literally like a half mile down the way, there's another guy, and another half mile down the way, there's another guy. And there are a lot of guys on the same island right now. And I find that if you were to go out, just with what you're talking about, go out and talk and tell your story with someone else. And you'll find not only that you're not alone, but other people are going through the same thing. And you both can help one another just by being a listening ear, not solving. Guys, hear this. Ladies, you can take a back seat for a moment, because this is for all the guys. Guys, you don't have to fix everything. In fact, it's probably better if you don't, because most of us are the cut before we measure. And so we make like 50 different cuts. At the end of the day, we have to slow down, stop trying to fix things and just be present in the moment. Yeah. I love that you say that.
One of my favorite sayings from my mentor, Jack, is he used to call me the ready, fire, aim guy. Ready, fire, aim. Oh crap. And that's what a lot of men do. We ready, fire, aim. And it's like, it's slow down. It's okay.
It's okay.
It's okay. It's more fun if you ready.
Yeah.
Aim. Fire.
You get better results when you aim too.
Yeah, you do. So,
yeah.
I think what it reflects is some cowardliness. And maybe that's hurtful for some of the guys that are listening, but if you're not reaching out to other men, you're being a coward. You're going, how come I don't have friends? I mean, I can't tell you how many men I've talked to. They're like, I don't have any friends. Well, whose fault is that? It's your fault. Like, it's your responsibility to create friendships and be a man that's worthy of that friendship, Yeah. So don't be a coward. Go and have those conversations. Feel like a phony, feel awkward, feel uncomfortable. And then all of a sudden you'll realize that, wait, there's a bunch of other people that want that connection that aren't getting it. And I've been there, and that's why I can speak so passionately about it.
And guess what? Everyone else feels awkward and weird and strange in the same exact moment. And I would go as far, like even extending this, yes, men do this a lot. Women also do this a lot. Everyone does this. Everyone, I wish I had more friends. I just wish I had a good friend to talk. Well, go make a friend.
Right.
You know how many people are sitting on a bench somewhere saying, man, I wish I had a friend. I wish someone would talk to me and be my friend. Well, go find a friend. There's billions of people in the world. You've got a phone. Go text them sometime. Like, it's not hard. It's not complicated. I love how much of a learner you are. Truly, Kyle. One of the things that kind of was sticking out to me as I was kind of reading up on you and hearing you talk and a number of different things that you've done in the past. Because of this idea of being a lifelong learner, being a self-help junkie kind of person, I relate. I've been there. I am there at times. Having that learner mentality has caused you to be creative, to do things that maybe other people would look at, man, like, wow, that's really stepping outside the box. Your girls actually inspired you to step out of the box and be creative by writing a book, Meadowbrook.
Oh yeah.
And it's funny because having kids does something to you. I think having daughters does something to you. I'm curious for you. What is kind of a major personality piece that shifted for you? Maybe not necessarily right when you had one of your daughters or all of your daughters, but at one point, I think there's a shift where we start to look at ourselves differently of going, man, I need to be different in order to support to support my daughters. Do you recall something inside of you that shifted or changed that you thought, man, I want to show up differently to be there for my kids in a way that maybe you didn't before you had them?
I think the moment, there's one moment that comes to mind, and then there's kind of an ongoing thing that I've recognized that keeps me grounded. And that is when we had our third child, or our third kid, we had her here. And I remember my oldest sitting next to my middle kid, with my oldest holding the newborn, Lydia, in her lap, while my wife is, still laying in bed. I mean, it's literally brand newborn, minutes old, and holding her. And I took the picture, and I was crying while I took the picture because like the level of joy and excitement that I saw in the eyes of my daughters and wife was just unbelievable. And so for me, it's like, I don't want to take that away in any way, shape, or form. And when I do, because I do sometimes, I got to fix it. I got to repair that as fast as I freaking can, because that intensity of joy and love was one of the most pure and beautiful things I've ever seen in my life. And I want to perpetuate that for them. And so for me, the way that I do that is eye contact. And what I mean by that is, whether it's my kids, my wife, or my friends, or my clients, real spending time with someone and being present with them is done with eye contact, right? If I'm making eye contact with that person, I am present. If I'm not, then my level of presence is a lot less. And so that's just a great litmus test for me. That was a big lesson for me. And I don't like eye contact that much. It's changed, and I don't like that. I don't use that language anymore for myself, but I struggled with it. And I've pivoted it towards realizing the power of it and honoring that. And when I'm interacting with my kids or my wife, I try, but I don't do it. I'm not 100%, but I try to keep it and focus on their eyes, because now I'm present with them. And when I don't, it's definitely not as good of a focus.
I love that. My wife tells me this all the time, and I love that you say this, because she reminds me, don't rob your kids of their joy. Don't steal their joy. Don't steal their love for life. And I can be a realist. Let's get real here. I like to bring the reality of situations to light sometimes with my kids, oftentimes. And my wife is constantly reminding me, let them be joyful, let them experience life, let them have fun, right? And I think we could do the same thing for other people in our lives too, not just our kids, but maybe inject some life and joy in the lives of other people and how we show up. Encourage that, right?
Yep.
Before we kind of wrap up here, I have one more question for you. This has been so much fun to get to know your story, hear more about you, Kyle. One of the things that is truly amazing, I think, about who you are, actually does kind of tie in with what we were just talking about. You have a levity to you. You are lighthearted, and you like to have fun. If you guys get a chance, go check out some of the other podcasts that he's been on because they're hysterical. They're funny. There's one in particular that reminds me of like your time of, swimming and a Speedo mishap and like just there's some really cool things about your life.
Speedo mishap. Yeah.
Yeah. But Kyle, I want to ask you this. A lot of times, pretty much every time on this program, I like to encourage people to stop doing and focus on being. Yeah. And you actually set this up so perfectly earlier on of, going from one thing to the next and needing to just slow down and be present. What would you tell your daughters? Let's say they get, they're going to get older. They're going to start focusing on what they want, their dreams, their aspirations. And there's going to be a moment where their personality and who they were created to be is going to be challenged. What would you tell them right now that would help them to stay grounded in their identity rather than running after all these different trophies and accolades that in the end, you and I both know don't make you happier, but they actually pull you away from your identity of who you were created to be? What would you say to your daughters?
Yeah, but the question that comes to mind is, for what purpose? Ask them when they're thinking about these things, all these directions they're being pulled, is for what purpose? What is the reason? What's the purpose behind this? What is the why behind these things? And making sure that purpose lines up with your values, that purpose lines up with what, in their case, what God has for them, right? For what purpose am I doing this? And if that purpose doesn't line up, then don't do it. If that doesn't line up with your values, then don't do it. It's that simple. Is it that easy? No, it is that simple, but it's not that easy. So I would say that, for what purpose? And in the midst of that, not going at it alone, right? Making sure that they are consistently seeking input and someone to talk to, someone to lean on, someone to have a conversation with about this. And one of the things that I intend to do with my kids, they're not quite there yet, but it's already kind of happening, is putting mentors in their life that can speak into their life. So obviously my wife and I are doing that, but then grandparents are doing that, aunts and uncles are doing that. But I also want people outside of the family that are doing that, because it's expected of the family. But when a friend of ours speaks into their life, it's a different thing, right? And so being very intentional about making sure that they pursue that on their own, and then I bring that to them as best as I can. But answering the question, for what purpose am I doing this, is, I think, absolutely huge.
I love the question, for what purpose? And I also love this idea of installing mentors that are outside of your family in your kids' lives. That is huge. And not only is it huge in that moment, but it also sets them up for success later in life, that they are going to need to find mentors, people who have gone before them. So that's absolutely powerful. Brother, I appreciate you so much for coming on the show. If you guys want to connect with Kyle and learn more about him, purchase one of his books, or check out some of the podcasts that he's been on. Just some phenomenal content and some great drops of gold that he just drops on pretty much every program that I've ever heard him on. You can check out those links in the show notes. And to all of you out there listening, thank you so much for liking, sharing, supporting the show. And until next time, remember to be more, see more, experience more than before.